Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Material Pathways, Redefining Preferred. Today's presentation will be recorded and will be posted on the Hub. In addition, an email will be sent to all registered participants with links to the recording and presentation. There are several of you joining us today, and we're really excited to have you. And to make sure we will capture all the questions, we encourage you to type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. We will have Q&A time at the end where we want to make sure that we answer those questions for you. So please be welcome to enter those questions as you would like to in that Q&A doc. Now on to Meg with Textile Exchange. Meg?
Thank you, Rose, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. We have some really great content and excited to dive in. So next slide, please. So what we want you to walk away with an understanding of today is really the urgency to move from incremental change to industry transformation. And then also an understanding of what needs to happen across the industry to deliver on this industry transformation and our shared Climate Plus goals. And then how these key interventions and actions connect to our Climate Plus levers, which we'll hear more about shortly from Anna. And then our intention and expectations of the recently published definition of preferred guidance doc. And then lastly, how we are here to support you along in this journey and what we will offer you across the community. So speakers today. So myself, I'm Megan Stoneburner, the Director of Fibers and Materials, will be your host for today. We also have with us Beth Jensen, the Director of Climate Plus, Kate Riley, the Synthetics Fiber Lead, and then Anna Heaton, who is the Animal Fibers and Materials Lead. So rundown of the show today. So we'll start with an overview and a review, so a refresh, I should say, of the 5 key interactions and actions to drive connected collective action at scale. And that last part is extremely important. We'll also have a discussion around the purpose of preferred fibers and materials and the recent guidance doc that was published and really how it should be used at this point in time. We'll also be sharing more details in terms of next steps on the definition of preferred and what's to come, and then include a sneak peek on our 2030 material challenges, which are in development as we speak. And then lastly, I'll end with Q&A, which we're asking for everyone once again, just as a reminder, to submit your questions via the Q&A chat box, and then we'll all answer those questions as a team. All right, so just as a bit of a reminder, we published the materials report last November, so it is online. We encourage everyone to go and read the full report. It's only 35 pages, as it is a ton of information that we can't essentially go into today. So for today's purposes, we want to just refresh everyone on the key takeaways and the key action points from that report. So with that, I'll hand it over to Anna Heaton.
Thanks, Meg. Thank you for that intro. And yes, as Meg said, we're going to start with a bit of a refresher here. And I'm sure this slide is familiar to quite a few of you who've been on Textile Exchange webinars, but so just sort of really ground us in the evidence that we're looking at. So I really want to remind everyone of the greenhouse gas modelling that's been conducted and the 3 levers that have been identified in order for us to achieve a 45% greenhouse gas reduction across all fibres and materials by 2030. So this yellow line, the 45% pathway, this is what we need to be on in order to achieve our goals. And then this brown line at the top is what happens if we carry on with business as usual. And in order to bridge this gap between the 45% pathway and the business as usual, we've identified 3 key levers. Firstly, we need to reduce the growth that's related to new materials and products. Secondly, we need materials substitution. We need to look at our material choices and make the switch to those with better outcomes. And that is really when we start talking about our definition of preferred and what falls into that, whether it's organic, recycled, and other more responsible choices. We don't have time to do this bit by bit. We really need aggressive substitution across materials portfolios now. The third lever, this is the piece that's shaded in green here, is the innovation gap. These are the kind of solutions that we know to be beneficial, but we don't currently have the data to quantify the impact reduction. So they are solutions that we know are available and can be selected, but we just can't tell you exactly what the impact reduction might be. So the kind of thing in this innovation gap includes regenerative land management for the land-based fibres. So that would be the animal fibres, cotton and fibre crops, those kind of materials, as well as in the innovation gap, things like textile to textile recycling. So say there are solutions that we know are happening in the world, but we might not be at scale quite yet. We know we need to advance that. But the really important takeaway from this slide is that we can't just pick one of these things to do. We really need to have all three in order to reach the goals that we're heading for. And then with this next slide, this is looking at the volume and impact breakout by fibre type across the main fibre types. So on the left-hand side, you can see the greenhouse gas impact that relates to the production that is shown on the right. So the left-hand side is against this 1 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, and the right-hand side is against this scale of 1 million tonnes of production. From the bottom up, just so that I know sometimes it's hard to see all the colours in the key, but from the bottom up, we've got polyester in green, cotton in yellow, leather in light blue, wool in orange, and then man-made cellulosic fibres in dark grey. And those materials make up the vast majority of the total fibre and materials production volume and the greenhouse gas impacts as well. It's worth looking as well that the width of these bars in terms of production are not equally matched to the width of the bars when it comes to the emissions from greenhouse gas. So, for example, while synthetics in grey here is by far the largest volume of material produced, in terms of impact per kilo of material, it's less than wool. So wool, you can see the volume produced is relatively small here, but the impact per kilo is much larger. This is noting that this impact data is using the HIG MSI data, and that we are also working on new life cycle analysis for animal fibres. I know that some of you listening have concerns about how animal fibres are captured in some of the LCA data we have at the moment. And some of our work is looking at life cycle analysis, which will include an LCA for responsible wool standard wool. And to sort of summarize these couple of slides as in terms of, why it's time for action and what we need to be doing right now, taking all this into consideration, the picture's really clear. We're not going to meet, the fashion and textile industry is not going to meet the Climate Plus goals if conventional fibre production and total consumption continues at its current rate. That business as usual line on the first graph, which just shows our overall emissions continuing to rise. The need for bold climate action is therefore more urgent than ever. And as we move forward, it is important to improve our data collection and measurement. I mentioned a couple of the data gaps that we're facing, things like what's the reduction in impact if we switch to regenerative management for land-based fibres. But at the same time, we have enough information now to make informed decisions and to take action. So we know these are the we sometimes talk of these as the no regrets action. We haven't got time to wait until all the data is perfect. There are things that we know will support the outcomes that we want to see, and we need to take action to move towards those now, and then we'll continue to work on the data so that we can quantify those actions down the line. So beyond that, and then beyond the aggressive material substitution, which might then be including some of these innovative points, we also need to look at these other key levers. And the decoupling growth rates point, this is sometimes the hardest lever that we have to talk about. And I think this is also worth sort of going into a little bit more detail about that. This is about really creating value. So it's not sort of stopping any of our sort of business and how we produce and market products, but creating value outside of just new raw material production. So we can create items through increasing the waste feedstocks through closed loop production systems. We can expand product longevity, and that's taking up those kind of options through resale, repair, rental services, and new circular models. And we can also design for circularity by focusing on durability, recyclability, and biodegradability. So there are options, positive options that we can take forward that come under this sort of decoupling growth rates, or coming under this degrowth point as well. And as I touched on previously, they're filling the innovation gap by rapidly scaling projects and impact reduction accounting. We can take action now, and we'll catch up with the data, or the data is working along in the background, and we'll have that quantification down the line. So thank you for that. And I think I'm going to hand you back to Meg now.
Great. Thank you, Anna. So what we heard is just further information in terms of why we need to act so quickly, and that also there's a bit of work to do. And we've had a lot of you come to us as an organization to say, where do I get started? Where do I focus? And that is the intention of this materials pathway guidance doc and report, is to create key actions across the fibers and materials, which is displayed here on the screen, but also in detail within the report that specifically list by fiber material in terms of what we need to solve for, what solutions we have, and how quickly and where to focus, I should say, in terms of acting. So across the entire materials portfolio, we have 5 key actions that we're asking everyone to rally against to be able to actually move the needle to create meaningful change. So with that, starting with number 1, the industry must focus, and must is critical here, must focus on the primary strategic fibers and materials that represent a very large portion of the total fiber production and volume impact. So with that, it's looking at polyester, which represents over 60% of total volume, looking at cotton, wool, bovine leather, and then viscose as well. We're also looking at nylon, and we'll provide additional guidance, but just wanted to note that that's an area where there's more to come. Secondly, we must substitute conventional materials with existing proven solutions, and more importantly, help to scale those solutions, examples being organic and recycled materials that are already out there in the market. And beyond that, it's critical that we prioritize the scaling of new innovations that help to fill the innovation gap that Anna was just speaking to. We want the industry to really rally behind textile to textile recycling, knowing that feedstock availability of plastic bottles is an issue for polyester, and a fiber material, once again, that we must solve for, but also looking at regenerative farming as a new innovative method, which we know has been around for centuries, but really making sure that we help to scale that, maintaining its original intent, and also ensuring that it's accessible in terms of those methods across the industry. And then also to note here that these new innovative emerging and next generation materials and solutions must be commercially viable, and that we must take a data-driven approach in vetting these materials. And then lastly, and most importantly, to achieve our Climate Plus goals, we must move from industry incremental progress to maximizing beneficial outcomes and impacts. So thinking about industry transformation and solutions that will lead us along that path. This requires us to raise our level of ambition. It feels heavy at times, but if we collectively can rise the bar together to drive continuous improvement as a whole, we have a chance of hitting our 2030 Climate Plus goals. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Beth Jensen, who will walk us through the recently published guidance doc and updates on the definition of preferred. So Beth, over to you.
Hi, everybody. So why did we look to develop some initial high-level guidance related to preferred materials? I think the main reason that we started to work on this is because we received requests from many member brands who were seeking us to help put some clarity around what it really means for us as an industry to talk about a material as being preferred. So a bit more detail about this piece of work and kind of how we approached it. In 2010, Textile Exchange began utilizing the term preferred to categorize fibers and materials that included environmental or social improvements over the status quo options. And then fast forward to 2019, that's when Textile Exchange really established its Climate Plus strategy that you've heard referenced previously in this presentation. And just to refresh everyone on the Climate Plus strategy, that is saying that we need to focus on greenhouse gas impact or climate impacts within the industry as our North Star. However, we need to do that while also ensuring that we're considering and addressing other interdependent impact areas like biodiversity, soil health, water, social impacts, and animal welfare impacts. So the greenhouse gas modeling that we've conducted thus far has shown us that we really do have a long way to go as an industry to achieving our 2030 target of 45% greenhouse gas emissions reduction that you've heard referenced already. And we don't have very much time to do this, as we all well know. The information that Anna just showed is specifically related to GHG emissions. I want to really call that out as some context as well. The next frontier that the impact data team and I are working on at Textile Exchange is really working to set targets and measure progress and measure impact data and so forth for the industry within areas beyond greenhouse gas emissions. So those bar charts that Anna showed will likely look different in terms of the breakdown of impacts related to nature-related impacts, for example, related to materials, using the volume information that was shown in that slide. So we're working with groups like Science Based Targets for Nature to adopt best available methodologies for accounting of impacts beyond greenhouse gas emissions. And when we think about those other impacts, again, particularly related to biodiversity and nature, we want to think about moving as an industry from doing less bad to doing more good. So that's what you'll see here. One of the main reasons we wanted to evolve how we think about preferred materials. As you see here, it's to move the industry away from, and we still need to focus, by the way, on minimizing harm, but moving along the continuum to more thinking about how do we maximize the beneficial impacts of the sourcing that we do of raw materials in the industry. So in partnership with the Fashion Charter for Climate Action, we developed this high-level guidance as a starting point around an updated view of what is meant for a material to be considered preferred. So you can move to the next slide, Anna. So just some very important context and framing related to this document. We want to be very clear about what this document, this guidance is at this stage and what it is not. So it is intended to provide high-level guidance around a shared vision and direction of travel for the industry related to preferred materials. It is not intended to determine what materials are or are not considered preferred today. We recognize that most programs and materials would not meet all of the criteria today. That is okay. That's the intent of the document, is to provide a North Star for us as an industry, a shared direction of travel, as we say, toward an ideal state of preferred materials in the industry. So I hope that's helpful context and framing. You know, we really want to make sure it's clear that this is not some sort of new set of criteria that must be met. This is not, at least at this stage, you know, this is not something that it's not something that's black and white today of whether or not materials are in or out of being considered preferred. That is not the intent of the document. It's to provide an initial view that the industry can rally around of where we need to go related to preferred materials. So hopefully that helps provide some clarity on the framing. You can move to the next slide, Anna. So we just wanted to show the current definition here and then the updated definition that we've come out with at a high level through this process. I won't go through and read these in detail, but I think you'll see that the updated definition really matches what we were talking about, what I just talked about a couple of slides ago related to wanting to incentivize beneficial impacts versus just doing less bad. The updated definition will be used to guide a few key pieces of work. You can stay on the last slide, Anna, if you don't mind. Thanks. The updated definition will be used to guide a few key pieces of work. It will be used to recognize programs for the 2030 material challenges. It will highlight transformational fiber and material programs within the materials market report and material change insights report that Textile Exchange puts out on an annual basis. And it will also inform the indicators within the preferred fiber and materials matrix, which is another tool that's being developed by Textile Exchange, specifically to assess the different components that are offered by various raw material standard systems. So we just shared a sneak peek of some updates that we've made to this tool with the membership community last week. And we are looking toward a summer 2023 public launch of the final updated preferred fibers and materials matrix tool. So just a bit of an update on that. Okay, you can move on then, Anna. Yeah, thanks. And just a quick overview of how we've organized the updated preferred materials guidance document. We've organized some high-level principles around the 5 key categories you see here. So climate, nature, animals, people, and governance. And again, just to say that the principles describe general concepts, not specific requirements. The intent is really, again, to focus on the long-term ideal state. So what's the pathway we need to sort of align around as an industry to move toward preferred materials? And we did integrate more of a focus on outcomes, I think, than we've had kind of coming through in our previous thoughts and definitions that we've utilized around what it means to be a preferred material. This is really something that we're focusing on. It's sort of a thread, I would say, throughout a lot of our work at Textile Exchange right now is how do we do a clearer job of connecting best practices to the outcomes that we actually want to see in these different systems. And practices will remain important, no doubt about it, and will particularly remain important as we're moving along this continuum. And in that vein, how do we also start to look at the outcomes that we actually want to see and make sure that the practices that we're putting in place as a broader collective industry are actually leading to those desired outcomes. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Meg for the implementation and integration roadmaps. If you want to move to the next slide there, Anna. Yeah, Meg, back to you.
Great, thanks, Beth. So as you just heard, this is not a one-step approach. It's not to say that we've released this general guidance and now the industry is to solve for this. This is a multi-step approach with multiple phases. And really, we want to share in terms of integration and implementation that this is going to be rolled out over the course of the next 3+ years. This is our aim. So this is not set in stone, but we wanted to share high level what our plan is from current or present day through 2025. So in 2023, the focus is really on rolling out the overarching guidance, which we shared today with you in terms of the direction of travel, which includes the principles and core criteria. But then also we're working on material specific guidance that we'll share across the industry and aim to launch that or roll that out in Q3 of this year, so prior to conference. Once again, I think it's really important to note here that both are not meant to be interpreted for immediate action, but instead we're releasing these as preparation for phase 3. So then moving into 2024, we will start to align the material specific criteria with our Textile Exchange tools while also supporting our program partners during this transition. And I want to note that it's not to say all of the criteria within the overarching guidance doc will be rolled out into our tools. It's to say the criteria that's foundational. You'll notice in the actual report, there's foundational and aspirational criteria. We'll be looking at the set of foundational criteria as a starting point. And then finally, in 2025, we aim to update our tools and resources at Textile Exchange, an example being the PFMM assessments to incorporate the updated definition of preferred materials criteria. And really, most importantly, throughout this journey, we will continuously support the fiber and raw material programs and partners. We recognize that this is an iterative process and will evolve as we aim to drive continuous improvement throughout the years. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to now hand it over to Kate Riley, who will share some insights and new developments on our 2030 material challenges that are currently underway. So Kate, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Meg. So it's really good to see so many of you here today on the webinar, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the 2030 material challenges and what's coming in that area over this year. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. With the material challenges, we really have an opportunity to accelerate industry action by building upon the current material challenges to create new programs, with our aim being to establish 2030 material challenges which are aligned with the updated definition of preferred to drive the conversion of conventional fibres and materials to preferred alternatives. And as you've heard so far in this webinar, what we really want to do is tie this into our specific fibre criteria within the definition of preferred, which will be coming later this year. And the core principles and objectives really of our material challenges is to focus on 5 key areas, which you can see here on the screen. And to provide more detail and context, these are generally around increasing action on the Climate Plus levers and material pathways by directing industry-wide material substitution. It's about driving material conversion without increasing the total volume of production. And I think this is a point that's really, really important for us to note, is that we are not encouraging increased production through the challenges, and that's not the purpose of the challenges, but we really want to focus on material conversion and driving towards preferred. And the challenges really signal to Tier 4 on the ground farmers, producers and programme partners the wide-scale industry interest and investment in preferred fibres and materials. So as both Beth and Meg have said, we're really moving in the right direction. And this is to signal to the industry that that's where the demand really lies, and these are the solutions of the future. We also have a core principle and objective being to drive beneficial outcomes across all Climate Plus indicators, so climate, soil health, biodiversity and water. And on a kind of admin side, the reporting of the challenges will continue to be reported through the Material Benchmark Programme, which has an annual reporting cycle. So for those of you who are already involved in some of our 2025 challenges, that reporting process will stay the same. And for those of you who hopefully will join us in our journey to 2030, you will come along with us on the reporting cycle within the benchmark programme. And we have a great team to support with the reporting requirements. So the desired outcome of the challenges, really in line with these core principles and objectives, is that we want a significant increase in the conversion of our strategic fibres and materials from conventional to preferred. We really want to see industry-wide scale of existing solutions and promising innovative solutions come to the market. We also want industry investment in transitional and innovative models, and we see a lot of this happening, which is really exciting across different parts of the supply chain, and we really encourage much more of that to happen. We also want a desired outcome to be wide-scale adoption of preferred fibres and materials linked to beneficial outcomes, as well as a tiered commitment approach from a beginner sourcing commitment through to investment in growers and producers and an advanced investment funds with tiers based on revenue. So we have several high-level desired outcomes which we really hope will be achieved through these challenges. And let's move to the next slide for an overview of what's to come with the 2030 challenges. So in order to move us forwards, we're working on material challenges that will incorporate our strategic fibres and material categories with a target year of 2030. And as Meg has said, we really have to focus on the priority material areas, which will be around polyester, cotton, wool, and viscose. So this covers the areas that we really see as being strategic and a priority for our industry in line with the material pathways. Given that we have existing challenges out to 2025 at the moment for recycled polyester and for sustainable cotton, we will build on these and ensure alignment with our material strategies. So as it comes to polyester, this means a focus on textile to textile recycling. And within the areas of cotton and also including wool, which is to come, the emphasis will really be put on regenerative practices and methods. So we're planning to launch all of the 2030 material challenges this year within Q3 prior to our annual Textile Exchange conference. So stay tuned over the next few months for more information which is to come. And let's move to the next slide to have a look at the timeline in a bit more detail. So as you can see, we'll be working on the launch by Q3 of this year. But prior to that, there is an awful lot of work to do, and we're really excited about what's to come. So the last 6 months has seen us internally develop a framework and a strategy for these material challenges, which has brought us to the concept phase that we're in now. And within the early part of Q2, which is just around the corner, we're working on building out and drafting the challenges, as well as beginning a consultation period to review and finalise the challenges. Q3 will then see recruitment and launch, followed by continued amplification efforts at the conference and throughout the rest of 2023. So all that to say, there's much more to come and some exciting developments in the challenges this year, so stay tuned. And with that, I will hand back to Meg.
Great, thank you, Kate. And so this last slide, in summary, just shows all that's coming down the pike for the industry related to the topics that we've presented today. So as Kate said, we've been working on concept phase, strategic approach for both the material pathways, challenges, and for the definition of preferred. And then really in Q2, it's ensuring that we're drafting the material specific definition of preferred criteria, those challenges, so we can open up stakeholder consultation for both in Q2, which will then transition for certain areas across Q3, and with the aim and end goal of launching and rolling out both the definition of preferred fiber and material specific criteria, as well as those 2030 challenges at the end of Q3, so we can have some really meaningful discussions at conference while we're together about both of these topics. So wanted to give you a viewpoint and really note what's important for you guys to understand of what's coming down the pipeline. We'll share more information in terms of stakeholder consultation in the next couple of months, but mark your calendars that this will begin to happen starting mid-May. And then moving on, so at this point in time, we would love to open it up to Q&A. So as we stated, if you have any questions, please make sure to submit them in the Q&A box. And the Textile Exchange team is here to help answer those questions, but we really wanted to dedicate around 30 minutes of our time to answer any questions you have related to these specific topics. So we will start to dive into specific questions. I want to note really quickly that there have been some questions around access to the guides, the material fibers guides, as well as then the preferred fibers and materials definition guidance doc. So we will be sharing those links. We'll also follow up with a recording of this presentation and then share those specific PDF versions of those guidance docs as a follow-up to this call. So more to come in terms of how to access all of this information. Does anyone want to kick us off with a specific question and answer from the team?
Yeah, I can take a couple, Meg, that are both related to the preferred fiber and materials matrix. I am actually, apologies for the confusion. I'm not actually sure where several of you heard that was going to be published in 2025. But yeah, that's indeed coming out in public version this summer, 2023. in the next version. And then from there, following the launch of the next version in summer, our next area of focus within that tool is going to be building it out to include additional programs beyond the ones that have been assessed in the last couple of rounds of that tool. So more to come on that. Sorry again for the confusion on that, but yeah, you'll be certainly seeing an updated version of that tool in summer 2023. Let's see here. And then just to specifically build on the second question on this topic, which reports can be used in the meantime to learn more about preferred material and impacts of fibers. I think also the material pathways documents that Meg just mentioned will be another great resource for you, as well as a number of other tools and resources I think that we can provide as Textile Exchange. So we can follow up, as Meg said, with some specific links to the appropriate documents as a starting point. And then always feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about any of those documents.
There's also a question here from Samantha. Do you expect to reference specific regenerative program certification standards for the 2030 Cotton Challenge? And the simple answer is yes, we're still working through the scope of that, but we do want to recognize preferred fibers and materials programs and are still working through, once again, the exact scope of those challenges. But we do want to incorporate regenerative, as that's something that wasn't necessarily fully captured in the 2025 Cotton Challenge.
I may also jump in. There was a question that came in around GRS and textile to textile recycling. So I can take that one. The question was, for textile to textile, will there also be a revision on GRS to have visibility on feedstock against bottle recycling? So for those of you who are maybe not aware at the moment, we're going through a process to unify all of the Textile Exchange standards into one unified standard. Which will include the GRS current standard as a new recycled criteria. And this is something that we've been asked, I would say, quite a lot in the last few months. And I kind of have two parts to my answer. There is currently a section on transaction certificates where suppliers can indicate the feedstock that they're using. At the moment, that's not a mandatory section of the transaction certificate that has to be completed, but you can request suppliers to fill that in so that you know what type of feedstock has been used. And we are looking at updating the criteria to make that more of a mandatory option on the transaction certificate so that we do know where different types of feedstocks are coming from. And within the unified standard process, there will be a draft of the new standard coming out in the next couple of months for public consultation. So I would say stay tuned on the standard sides of things, and that will be addressed in the work that we're doing there. So hopefully that answers your question on that one.
I can take a couple more here. There's a question about the slow growth or reduction of growth lever that we have in our greenhouse gas impact reduction modeling chart, but then why we didn't address that throughout the rest of the presentation. So a couple of comments there. I will say this presentation is specifically related to the discussion around how we look at and approach thinking about preferred materials. So that was the specific scope of this webinar. That said, I mean, we've been really clear and will continue to be really clear as Textile Exchange that we have to get away. I mean, our vision is that, materials are either from a closed loop recycled source or are produced, using a regenerative organic natural source that's not from fossil fuels in the future. And so that's our general sort of North Star that we are working toward. And so I think there's a lot wrapped up in the discussion about slow growth and how we as Textile Exchange from a tier 4 raw material sourcing perspective can specifically help influence that topic. So stay tuned for more on this. We're actually actively working on this internally and what we can do and offer to the industry in this space. And I would point to our conference in November or in October this year in London as a place where we'll be continuing that discussion. So more to come on this topic. Bit outside of the scope for the discussion today, but certainly one of the key levers that we absolutely have to address, both from a climate and GHG impact perspective, but also from the perspective of the rest of the impacts that we're looking at in our Climate Plus strategy, including impacts related to nature. So, and then another question here on around better cotton and where they might fall within this new definition. We know they have similar greenhouse gas goals, but the data doesn't, pending data, basically, the data doesn't exist yet. I will just say on that one of the things that we've outlined in the definition of preferred guidance, high level guidance, direction of travel, is that it's going to be considered best practice to have data. So to have that impact data available and accessible for the industry. So that's all I'll say on that point. And I know many programs are working on gathering that impact data, which is great, and which we certainly want to support and help, help influence and accelerate in the industry, the gathering of that data in general.
And then I can chime in for the question related to ETA on the guidance for nylon, specifically related to the material pathways. So within the document, we cover cotton, polyester, wool, and then man-made cellulosics. We are updating the material pathways with leather in Q2. We're nearly finished with leather, and then nylon will be added in Q3. So just wanted to note that once again, this is another example of an iterative process of us providing more resources. And Beth, I'm going to actually hand it over to you in terms of answering the question related to governance and chain of custody for the definition of preferred. And the question here is, within the governance principle, we mentioned chain of custody as a mechanism being one of the criteria. How do we see materials like trademarked or licensed materials fitting in here, since they have different and often less traceability mechanisms in place?
All I would say on this is, again, this document is designed to be direction of travel, shared vision for what makes up, what are the key concepts associated with preferred materials. Again, this is not a black or white situation where we're assessing programs per se against this criteria today. So all I would say about that is, I think, we as an industry want to look at what level of traceability will give us the information and confidence we need. That's how I would answer that question today. It's not a question of whether or not we would consider those types of programs preferred or not. I think it's a broader discussion to be had and to work on that continuum of practice as an industry around what does good traceability look like in all the different forms that could take.
And I think just to really quickly add to that, also looking at policy, and Beth, you know this better than anyone, but policy that could be coming down the pike and looking at implications of newly implemented policy. There's another question here. What is the new definition of better cotton? So once again, we're not defining certain programs per se by any means. We are working on material specific criteria, more to come. We're aiming to roll that out in Q3, but that is a work in progress. We once again will not be defining essentially what certain programs are delivering on within the guidance of the definition of preferred. We would look or suggest everyone to look into the PFMM for more specifics in terms of assessments of each of these cotton programs.
Yeah, and Meg, if I can just jump in on that one. It's lowercase better, lowercase cotton. So if this question is just more asking generally about what better cotton might look like, I would say, reference the principles that we've laid out in the updated definition of preferred materials guidance. Whether it's cotton or whether it's an animal fiber, whether it's a man-made cellulosic fiber, or whatever category it's in, a synthetic fiber. We've built out this high level, again, guidance and direction of travel to be applicable across all of those categories. So.
And there's another one come in that I can take around, we are a retailer, to be able to make a standard commitment, do we need to be a member? I am going to go under the assumption that this is related to the material challenges and making a commitment to those 2030 material challenges that we talked about. And if so, the answer is no, you don't need to be a Textile Exchange member to join those challenges. We welcome any organisation kind of that can meet the requirements of the challenge to come and join us on that journey. But if your question was more related to the standard side and becoming certified to a particular standard, then I would suggest having a look through the standards information on our website about the different requirements, depending on the specific standard that you're looking at, whether it's within the responsible animal fibres or within the recycled criteria, etc. That would be much more of a standards question than a challenge question. So depending which way you're talking about commitments, hopefully that answers your question.
There's another question about LCAs, organic and regenerative will give a lower yield. Okay, let me just read the question. In LCAs, no matter if they are an LCA plus or not, organic and regenerative will give a lower yield, which plays negatively in the land use category. So that lessening the burden by better grazing practices will be a negative. Saying that a biodiversity added category will weigh up for this is not how LCAs work. How will you address this? Well, the first thing I would say about that is that LCA methodology today does not adequately cover nature-related impacts that we're trying to measure, including soil health, biodiversity impacts, many water-related impacts, as well as if you think about social impacts and animal welfare impacts. So that's what we're doing as part of our LCA plus strategy is, yes, building out new LCA studies for the GHG emissions factors as an example, and the other key impacts that can be measured through LCA, and working with groups like Science-Based Targets for Nature and other leading groups who are developing methodologies to measure these land-based impacts beyond what LCA methodology itself is capable of doing today. So happy to answer any other questions about how we're approaching impact data and our impact data strategy and our Climate Plus strategy and all of that further offline if anyone is interested.
Great. And Beth, there's another question here regarding the PFMM. So reading it.
Actually, can I just address this other question related to LCAs while I'm on the topic, Meg? Yeah. There's another question here. How will LCAs be used in the definition of preferred fibers, given the recent controversies around these types of tools? I think I sort of just answered this question, but just to reiterate again, we are well aware that LCA methodology only covers a certain bucket of impacts. There are many other impacts that we want to look at as part of our Climate Plus and LCA Plus strategy that can't currently be captured by LCA methodology in general. No matter what LCA database you're using, LCA methodology itself is limited in terms of the impacts that it can capture. So this is what we're working on as Textile Exchange, is aligning with the broader industries and broader sectors, really beyond just apparel and textiles, who are looking at developing these quite technical methodologies to look at assessment of impacts beyond what LCA methodology is capable of doing today. So that is the approach that we're taking. Yes, LCA is the most built out tool we have available to us to look at environmental impacts of raw materials today as a sector. And we want to not only build out the amount of LCA data that we have available for those specific impacts that it covers, while also building out other methodologies that we can use in conjunction with LCA to look at sort of the more real-time, place-based, context-specific impacts, particularly related to natural systems. Oh, let's see here. Will this update in the preferred fiber materials matrix include hemp and other cellulosic fibers? I would have to go back and look, to be honest with you. We've been trying to incorporate as much as we can in terms of new methodology. What I will say is that some of the big components that we're working on right now is a human rights methodology, an updated human rights methodology, which is out for public comment now. So if you're interested in commenting on that, that's available for you to do. We're also updating what we call the initiative integrity component of the tool and indicators. So basically having a third party, an agnostic third party build out a methodology for us on that component as well. And a number of other sort of impact areas as well. So what I would say is that we've been focusing more on the build out of the different impact areas versus specific applicability to fiber types at this point in time. But take a look at the updates that we shared with the community on the hub related to the preferred fiber materials matrix. Again, that tool is organized by impact area. It's not necessarily organized by fiber type. So take a look at that, and happy to answer any questions you might have specifically about applicability of those impact areas to hemp. Yeah, and just to say that the focus is going to be on the existing material categories within the tool, and really some of those highest volume categories first, cotton, synthetics, et cetera. To Anna's earlier point about, you know, let's focus on where we have the highest volume in the industry today.
And then another question here in terms of expanding on how the PFMM will be aligned with the new definition of preferred and these criteria. So as we were stating.
Yeah, really. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Meg. You can take that.
I'll just at a high level speak to it, and then please feel free to chime in, Beth. But at a high level, it's taking the foundational criteria and really weaving it into the PFMM to make sure that the two are aligned is our high level approach at this point in time. But Beth, please chime in and add too.
Yeah. I mean, the definition of preferred guidance that we're sharing, again, broken record here, but it's direction of travel. It's intended to be, what does it ideally look like for us in the industry down the road? The preferred fiber materials. So that's high level general criteria that we should be considering in those 5 areas that we showed earlier. The preferred fiber materials matrix is really designed to be a more specific set of criteria around what is a standard system actually doing or not doing within the standard system, what is actually covered. Now it doesn't, in general, the preferred fiber materials matrix doesn't get to the level of actual measurements per se, but what it does do is ask, do you have a management system around this topic, and those types of questions. So just to be super clear, it's kind of different levels of detail basically within each of these different tools. And as more of these things start to come online, one thing we've really been talking about quite a lot internally is how we can ensure that it's clear sort of out to the industry how all of these things really do fit together, and really illustrating those different levels of detail. So more to come on that as well.
Great, thanks, Beth. And there's also a question here related to standards and certifications, more specifically about GRS certified products. And what I can say is that we will take this question back to our standards team and make sure that they'll follow up. So more to come on this.
And Jeff, just to answer this question as well, maybe a brief moment on ideas or plans for alignment of the work with the HIG. There's a lot to unpack in that question. I'm not sure if you're referencing the HIG MSI, the HIG brand module, the HIG facility module. So I'm not sure this is maybe the right place or time to address that. But if you were thinking about something specific there, I'm happy to take another stab. So just let us know.
All right, it looks like we have answered all questions. So with that, once again, we'll follow up on the GRS question. Jeff, reach out to us if you would like to have a further conversation related to your question. But with that, we're going to close then this session for today. So just a few final thoughts as we close this session. So with the latest IPCC report, I think we all know that at this point in time, the key takeaways is that we simply haven't done enough, but that there's still time to act if, and really underlining this word of if we come together and align on a shared set of solutions to achieve our shared set of goals. So with that, leaving us just as a reminder that we can make a difference, not only for our industry at large, but for people across the globe, as well as then for our planet. So thank you for joining us. Looking forward to having additional conversations and to sharing next steps in terms of what's to come. So have a lovely night, afternoon, evening, morning, rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
to our speakers, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, the recordings will be posted on the Hub, and an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. Also, be sure to join us on the Hub for further discussion or asking of questions and engaging with one another. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.